I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi. The dark side of the Force surrounds the Chancellor.
What if I told you that the Republic was now under the control of the Dark Lord of the Sith?
The dark side of the Force surrounds the Chancellor. Interesting words given to us by Mace Windu, but what did the Jedi Master mean by this exactly? Greetings again, Acolytes of the Force, welcome back to the archives. It's certainly not a secret that the Jedi Council, Mace Windu in particular, did not trust Supreme Chancellor Palpatine in the slightest bit, especially during the end of the Clone Wars. They all knew something was up, but despite knowing him for many years and being in the same room as him on multiple occasions, they never once went as far as accusing him of being a Sith Lord or the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. It's an ironic thing, but they all somehow knew that Palpatine was up to no good, but didn't exactly think he was the Sith that they were looking for. But why exactly is this, and why is it that the Jedi Council outright deemed it impossible for Palpatine to be Sidious? With all the Jedi's insight and intuition, what kept them from seeing what was right in front of their very eyes, and in the same room? Well, we actually have a passage in the Revenge of the Sith novelization that should clear all of this up. So, come along with us today, my acolytes and friends, as we take a look at the Jedi Council's investigation into Sidious and figure out how Sheev Palpatine eluded their suspicion for so long, until it was far too late. It's honestly bizarre how the Jedi never found out Palpatine's true identity. What many usually talk about when this subject is brought up is how Sidious is a master at the ability of Force Cloak. How he can mask his presence in the Force by burying his darkness so deep down within himself, it practically disappears, rendering him with the presence of someone who is completely without Force sensitivity. A while ago, we also produced a holocron talking about why the Jedi were never able to test Palpatine's blood for midichlorians, but this still doesn't answer the question on why exactly the Jedi were unable to figure this out through deductive reasoning. Count Dooku's admittance of the Republic being controlled by a Dark Lord of the Sith was swept aside by the Jedi Council in a fear-mongering move, a lie to get in their heads and distract the Jedi from the truth. Some consider this to have been a very foolish move, but we have to look at it from the Jedi's perspective. It honestly makes sense and would have been a genius tactic in psychological warfare that Dooku himself was exceptional at, considering his skill in Dun Mok when fighting with a lightsaber. If you remember, Dun Mok is the way of using insults and belittling words to plant poisonous thoughts of fear and doubt into the minds of one's enemies. If done properly, this could actually weaken someone's connection to the Force and blind their sight. Considering this information from Dooku and its source, it's reasonable why the Jedi discarded it. Still, nonetheless, before the Clone Wars broke out, Dooku hinted that Palpatine was a Sith Lord. But again, the Jedi disregarded this as bluffing, and still dragged their feet so long in the investigation of Darth Sidious, who was actually in their own backyard, that it backfired completely. However, near the culmination of the Clone Wars, the Jedi were indeed closing in on the wretched Darth Sidious, and were hot on the track of discovering the truth, as some discoveries which were made later in the war caused them to reconsider what Dooku had said. In fact, the Jedi apparently had figured out that Darth Sidious was indeed hiding in their midst. From the Revenge of the Sith novelization, we have this conversation between Jedi Master Windu and Obi-Wan Kenobi, wherein Windu fills him in on exactly what has been discovered. The following goes: we have circumstantial evidence that traces Sidious back to Palpatine's inner circle. After this, Obi-Wan asks if Mace is certain, and Mace Windu responds, "Nothing is certain, but this raid. The capture of Palpatine had to be an inside job, and the timing. We were closing in on Sidious, Master Kenobi. We traced the Sith Lord to an abandoned factory in the works, not far from where Anakin landed the cruiser. When the attack on Coruscant began, we were tracking through the down-level tunnels. The trail led to the sub-basement of 500 Republica." The novel then goes on to explain that the 500 Republica is the most elusive address on the entire planet of Coruscant. Its inhabitants included only the wealthiest or most popular of individuals, which of course included Palpatine. The Jedi had basically traced Darth Sidious right to Palpatine's front doorstep, and they were about to knock. Obi-Wan then asks Mace Windu if they have any suspects, to which he replies, "Too many suspects. All we know of Sidious is that he is bipedal, of roughly human conformation. Sate Pestage springs to mind. I wouldn't rule out Masameda either. The Sith Lord might even be hiding among the Red Guards." there's no way to know who Sidious is. Mace goes on to explain that they're not able to question anyone in the office because Palpatine would never allow it, as Mace says that the Chancellor barely even believes that the Sith exist, and there are no living accomplices who know Sidious personally that they can question, since Dooku is dead, and Maul is unaccounted for. In this moment, Obi-Wan wonders if Palpatine even has the kind of authority to keep the Jedi from conducting their investigation. And finally, Mace then tells us in these lines why the Jedi Council do not suspect Palpatine as the Sith Lord. The Senate has surrendered so much power, it's hard to say where his authority stops. The only reason Palpatine's not a suspect is because he already rules the galaxy. So with this information, let's break it down. It's interesting how they were convinced that it was someone within Palpatine's inner circle. Windu mentioned State Pestage as well as Mas Amedda as suspects, and while of course neither were Sith Lords, they didn't exactly have clean hands either. State Pestage was Palpatine's advisor and had been with him since his days as a senator on Naboo. Pestage was one of the few, along with Mas Amedda, that actually was aware of Palpatine's secret identity as Darth Sidious. Pestage actually carried out a lot of Palpatine's covert work from espionage to outright murder. The dark side of the Force would indeed surround Pestage, so it makes sense that Windu would suspect him. Mas Amedda is another obvious choice as well, perhaps even more convincingly because he rarely ever leaves Palpatine's side. As the Grand Vizier, Amedda had immediate access to Palpatine at all times and would often cover for him whenever Palpatine had to do business as Sidious. Both State Pestage and Mas Amedda definitely looked like the type as well, with rather unsightly facial features which included sunken-in eyes, wrinkly faces, sharp teeth in Mas Amedda's case, and a general dark disposition. With them constantly being around Sidious, it would make sense that the Jedi thought that they would have his ear in just about everything. But beyond this, Windu even goes as far to suggest that Darth Sidious may even be hiding amidst the Chancellor's Red Guards, which by itself would have been an absolutely fascinating disguise had that actually been the case. But in the idea of it being Palpatine himself, the Jedi essentially believe that Palpatine is indeed a power-hungry, crooked politician. But that's where the suspicion ends, and that's where they think he lies in all of this. What the Jedi truly believe is happening is that Palpatine is being controlled by a Sith Lord within his inner circle, who is using the Chancellor as a puppet without the Chancellor even knowing. According to the Jedi, yes, he's a crooked politician, but he's not so evil that he's a Sith Lord, or he would be an accomplice to one. I think it's very interesting how they believe that Palpatine wouldn't want to try to rule the galaxy, because as Mace Windu says, he already does. The Jedi had absolutely no idea that the ultimate goal of the Sith was going to be a galactic empire. I suppose it's because the Republic had existed for so long that the Jedi believed it was a constant and a permanent state. The Republic had stood for 25,000 years. How could it ever fall? In the natural, there is no way that it would be brought to its knees by one Sith Lord, and not even the entire Sith Empire accomplished this with a massive military and thousands of years of trying to conquer it. But the Jedi had absolutely no idea the kind of power that Sidious truly held over the Senate, or the power of his ambition. Palpatine's misdirection worked, and worked beautifully, even though it seems he got a bit cocky and sloppy towards the end where the Jedi were able to track him, and it almost cost him his empire. They in fact followed Sidious's trail right to Palpatine's mailbox. It was lucky that Sidious conceived his own kidnapping in time to delay any further investigations. Windu mentioned that the dark side of the Force surrounded the Chancellor. They just didn't assume it was actually the Chancellor himself. But now, my friends and acolytes, what do you think about this, and why the Jedi Council deemed it impossible for Palpatine to be Sidious, even though they knew he was involved? As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting our archives. If you haven't yet, reach out with the Force and crush that subscribe button. It is your destiny.